So what about equity and dividing equity among co-founders and equity vesting and all of that kind of stuff that we don't know what that stuff is?
So this is for the people who have more than one owner of the business, right? If you have one owner of the business, it's pretty easy to divide the equity up. Even a lawyer can do it. But if you've got multiple founders...
You know any good lawyer jokes?
More than I would care to repeat.
Okay.
If you have multiple founders, there's a couple of things that go on. One is that founders tend, when they're issuing the equity to themselves, to kind of dividing up among the founders, they give too much credit for what got them there and not enough credit for what needs to be done in the future. And so, for example, all the time I sit down with founding teams, and the founding teams, 3, 4, 5 people, whatever it is, and they say, we are founders, we are equal. We've been working on this thing together for the last 6 months or a year or whatever we want to incorporate, and I have to ask questions like, okay, who's going to be running the company over the course of the next several years? And what role will each of you have? And how much of the burden of carrying this business is going to be on you versus you? You know, you're the CEO, they're going to be, you know, director of marketing in this business. All founders are not created equal. And the person who's the CEO at some point is probably working 100-hour weeks. The director of marketing as a company grows may actually have a real job that, you know, doesn't have all the demands that a CEO position has. And the person who has the preponderance of the burden to carry is at some point is going to feel resentful of the folks that have an equal share of the business. And so I oftentimes will send the principal founder back and say, you want to get as disproportionate a share as you can, because at some point in the future, that's going to be what's going to save you and the ability to, you know, to make you motivated enough to continue to carry this business. So one point is that you can overshare equity. The other thing is equity is forever. You know, if you give equity to somebody and they are gone after a year, 4 years later, you're still carrying this business, and the person that you gave that equity stake to is long gone, but is benefiting from all of your hard work and is very appreciative, I'm sure. But the social contract among founders needs to be articulated, which is that you're in it for the long haul. And somebody who was there for 6 months or a year shouldn't be able to keep all the equity that they were initially granted if they leave, or there should be some, you know, additional equity grants to the founders who stick around. As it turns out, additional grants to founders who stick around is hard. So one of the things that you want to do, again, ignoring raising money, which is going to another issue, but one of the things you want to do is, as among the equity holders, you really should impose some vesting, so that if somebody walks out the door, you take some of that stock back, because you're either going to work harder and earn it for the remaining founders, or you need to hire somebody else in and give them equity. And if you don't take some stock back from the person who left, you're going to need to dilute everybody to give new equity to somebody.
So talk a little bit about vesting, define it.
Sure.
Talk about maybe some of the different strategies.
So vesting is, the basic concept is, if you get stock initially in a company, vesting is basically a right of repurchase that lapses over time. So, and a typical vesting schedule will be 4 years. And you typically would have what's called a 1-year cliff. So let me just kind of unpack some of those words. You get 1 million shares. So you got 3 founders, they each get 1 million shares. Relatively simple, straightforward company. Initially, none of the shares are vested. At the 1-year anniversary, 1/4 of each person's shares vest. And then generally, on a monthly basis thereafter, 1/48 ratably vests. If somebody leaves during that first year, the company can buy back the 1 million shares that they got, because they didn't vest any shares. And they can buy them back at a very cheap price. They buy them back at the same price they paid initially. So it's basically a forfeiture, which means that the remaining 2 founders are now 50-50 partners in a business, and that's probably right, because they're going to be the ones building value there and creating value. As time goes by, if you've spent 2 years at a business and on a 4-year vesting, you now have the right to keep half your stock, but the other half is subject to being repurchased. So it roughly equates to your contribution to the business. And I've had some very, very difficult conversations with founders who come in and they say, I've got a business and, you know, Joe was really useful at the very, very beginning, but he's not contributing, and we're going to let him go. And I say, great, what's his vesting schedule? Well, you know, we never got around to vesting. That's a tough conversation because there is no God-given right to take stock away from somebody unless they've given you that by contract. So if you don't think about this in advance, it's likely that Joe's not going to volunteer the stock. And if after Joe leaves, you decide to issue yourself a whole bunch of stock for free, Joe's probably going to sue you for that too. So you're stuck. It's just one of the things you need to do in advance. Now, I mentioned earlier the fundraising. One of the things that a professional investor, whether they're a professional angel or a venture capitalist, will do is they'll take one look at the company and that doesn't have any vesting in the stock, and they'll go, that's not the deal I'm investing in. Because my money goes in, my money's stuck. If you guys aren't stuck too, then we've got a bad deal. So if you don't have vesting on your stock before money comes in, the money's going to say, you want to put all your stock subject to vesting, and you know life starts when my first dollar goes in. So that means that you're not vested at all, and you have 4 years of vesting, and that's just a condition of my money coming in. If you've anticipated that problem, and you've already imposed some vesting, and you've already got a little bit of your stock vested, the money's probably not going to make you revest that stock. So you're better off forming the rules for yourself and arguing that they're fair than just kind of taking whatever the money requires you to do.
Now, what about tax planning from the beginning to optimize the value of your company?
Well, a lot of that's in the, there's a couple tax planning. We talked about the LLCs versus corporations. For better or worse, taxes are something, you know, you need to be an expert in a bunch of different subjects. Tax is one of them as an entrepreneur. It hits you in a whole bunch of ways. I mean, one of them is I actually just was in the bar talking to a brand new company, and we had a 1-hour conversation with 2 of 4 founders about tax issues, about, you know, how to get stock to people, stock to the founders without a tax hit. And, you know, they're going to raise money, and they're talking to venture capitalists, and they're going to get money in probably in the next month. So, you know, how do we make that happen easily? I mentioned earlier that oftentimes, you know, most businesses don't need a lawyer. You need a lawyer for that one. And I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but that's a don't try this at home. But there are tax issues that can catch you unawares. So, for example, if you're granting stock options, if you decide to grant stock options to some employees, and, you know, great idea, very good for motivating them, et cetera, but if you don't follow an arcane rule, an Internal Revenue Code called Section 409A, and appraise your stock before you grant the stock option, then that employee is probably going to get hit with taxes as the option vests over time before they have any cash to pay the taxes, and a 10% excise tax because you screwed up and didn't get the appraisal. So if you're using stock options, that's definitely one where there are serious gotchas in the tax code that you need to be very, very careful when you're granting them.
Talk about what an earn-out is.
So I've done a lot of acquisitions in my career, and there are how many people out there are planning on realizing value in their business long term by selling it? Reasonable number. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly there are a lot of great businesses that you can just have that make you money. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of businesses are planning, as many of you are, to sell. When you sit down with the buyer, you have a view of where your business is going. It's going to continue to grow at 30% annual rate. The margins are only going to improve. And oh, by the way, if you, the buyer, buy this company, there's all kinds of other value we can unlock in your business. So you're going to have a set of projections as to where the business is going to go. The buyer is probably hoping that that is going to be true, but when they're figuring out what their purchase price is, they're going to assume that your growth rate is going to start to flatten out, that your margins are not in fact going to improve because the business is going to get more competitive, or whatever. So you're going to have differing financial projections for the business over the course of the 3 to 5 years after the acquisition. Well, it turns out companies that look like what you think your business is going to do are worth $10 million, and companies that look like what your buyer thinks they're going to do are worth 5. And you've got a negotiation that will take place between the two companies. One of the ways that people bridge that gap is the buyer says, great, I think you're worth $5 million, but if your business performs in my hands like you think it's going to perform, then I'll pay you the additional 5, and we'll put in what's called an earnout on the business. That's kind of that's where the concept comes from. Now, very, very simple concept, seems really straightforward, seems totally fair, right? If you put your money where your mouth is. If your projections are true, then that's great. However, once you sell your business, you're not running it anymore. You're not the one making the call as to whether or not to spend that additional $1 million of marketing, or invest in new product development, or go into a new product area. You're not controlling pricing. You're not controlling who's running it. The employees the buyer might decide that they're a big company, it's a tough year, no raises this year, no bonuses. Big companies do that all the time. There's a lot of things that the buyer might do that you're going to say, well, you did that. There's no way I can make 30% a year if you cut off my marketing spend. And so the very, very simple concept of an earnout ends up being beastly complicated to negotiate. And you as the seller are ultimately going to lose control of the operation of the business, no matter how good you are and your lawyer is at negotiating terms. And so earnouts is, from the buyer's perspective, it's great. It's kind of free money. Sure, if it does well, great, we'll pay a little bit extra money. If it doesn't do well, not my problem. And you're shifting risk onto the entrepreneur. And so that's one of the more complicated and more difficult issues when you're negotiating the sale of your company. So when you first start the negotiation, you need to be a little careful not to get kind of drawn into that trap. Because a savvy buyer is going to say, oh, so you think that the numbers are going to be X and Y next year, et cetera. Are you willing to put money behind that? You're being drawn into an earnout. And you just need to be very careful about allowing that to happen. Or if it does happen, making sure that you've got as many protections as you possibly can, and you get as much guaranteed, as much, if you do this, then I get the full earnout. If you decide to lay anybody off, I get the full earnout. You need to kind of build the protections in place. And it's a place where value can very much leak out of a business, because you've got it all the way to the finish line, and then suddenly, there's another race that you need to run where the rules are different.
You've seen this one once or twice.
Once or twice. And actually, if you have sophisticated people on both sides, what oftentimes happened is you have I want $10 million and I'm willing to give you $5 million. Let's do an earnout. And then you spend 2 or 3 weeks negotiating the details of the earnout, and everybody gets incredibly frustrated, and you're screaming and yelling at each other, and you go, tell you what, how about 7.5? And you kind of need to go through that pain to make both of you compromise. So the ping pong game in a negotiation between sophisticated players is oftentimes you go in and out of the earnout, and you actually don't end up signing an earnout. Or you do what the Skype guys did, which is you make sure that you get your $3 billion up front, and if they want to throw an earnout on top of that, God bless them. That's fine. Happy to take whatever upside I can get out of it. But not going to compromise against the bottom line of what I want to protect in my business.
I need a minimum of $3 billion. It's my lowest number. Let's talk about venture capitalists. One of the stories going around a lot lately on the internet, and I just see it coming up more and more, is that these venture capitalists are vulture capitalists, and they're just there to take advantage of us, and they negotiate hard and they drive our business into the ground. And what are some of the things that someone might want to know that they wouldn't normally know about a venture capitalist?
So one of the comments that was made earlier in response to a question at the last presentation was the investor who said, my job is to screw you. I thought that it was a very excellent response, which is you have the wrong investor. I mean, I've worked with, I probably do, 50 to 60 venture deals a year, and have for the last 20 years. So I've seen a few companies go through this process. You never want to get out of alignment of interest with your venture capitalists, because they are tough, sophisticated, take no prisoners kinds of business people. But the fact is, a venture capitalist has money in your company. They own stock. You own stock. There's preferred stock and there's common stock, but ultimately, it kind of all, it's hard to make money on one without making money on the other. As they want your stock to be as valuable as it possibly can be. Now, if you have non-financial reasons to be in business, then you're out of alignment and you should never bring in venture capital. I mean, if what you want to do is save the world or have something to give to your children or whatever, that is not an interest that the venture capitalist is going to respect. But if what you want to do is build a business to make money from it, then your interest and the VC's interests are very well aligned. Now, the VC may believe at some point that you're the wrong person to run this business. If more of your wealth is in the shareholdings than in the salary, then you should be supportive of that, of removing yourself as a CEO, because you've got a very smart, sophisticated, heavily invested partner who is saying that they want to put somebody else in the CEO role. A lot of founders don't have quite the ability to have that distance from that decision of removing themselves as CEO, and a lot of VCs see that as one of the tools in their toolkit, and will pull it out if necessary. And so you definitely have founders who get pretty torqued about that, and they are very active bloggers, and they write all about it. The thing that terrifies the VC is that someday they might have to run the business themselves. I mean, one of the reasons they're venture capitalists and not entrepreneurs is they would just as soon not take all the risks that an entrepreneur has, and they don't operate businesses nearly as well as you guys do, and they can't make judgments in the business as well as you do. So they really don't want to run the business. They want to select a team with your help that's going to run the business effectively to build value. So if you keep that in mind, that they're not trying to screw you, then I think you can get along well. Now, that all said, I've certainly been involved in plenty of boardroom fights where founders are fighting against the VCs, and the VCs think the founders are crooks, and all, that stuff can happen. But in general, if you're dealing with known, sophisticated, name brand venture capitalists, I think that the vulture capitalist thing is overblown. Now, if you screw up, you're going to be out. And if they can take your stock back, they will. If you've agreed to vesting or et cetera, which you probably will, or if you miss your numbers and they need to put more money in, you will get diluted. So there's a lot of things that they're hard-headed business people, but it's nothing personal, and it's all about making their investment as valuable as it can be.
Yeah, you just mentioned vesting. Some VC deals are set up so that essentially they put the money into your company, and then they own your company, and you're earning your company back over time, essentially.
That's a founder-centric perspective, but yes. I mean, the fact is...
Did you say a founder-centric?
Yes, sorry.
Well, I think that's what we are. I don't know. I guess that's... Sorry.
And frankly, I do represent some VCs, but 90% of my practice is working with founders. So when you have...
You're not the enemy, are you?
I'm not the enemy.
Okay.
Honest.
Just totally making sure here.
You're not earning your stock. You're avoiding losing your stock. So you actually have the entire...
Right.
If you have your stake in the business, 20%, 30%, 50%, whatever it is, and it's subject to vesting, you still have that full percentage. And if the company were to sell, you would still realize the full value from it, or if there were dividends or whatever. You own that full percentage. It's only if there is a departure, if you're asked to leave, if you decide to leave and do something else, that your shares are subject to repurchase. So, but yes, you're earning it. Now, frankly, from the VC's perspective, they've already written the check. they're writing the check because they think that you're an enormous talent, you're unique, and 4 years of your talent is equivalent to several million of their dollars. And that's kind of the social contract between you and the VC. And if you take the check in and then walk out the door, or end up with drug addiction problems, or I've had all kinds of founder issues over the years, and you need to leave the company, then the quid pro quo isn't really there, right? The VC put their dollars in, and you didn't give 4 years of your talented efforts to the business, and that's the way they view it. And as long as you're committed to the business and you want to build something, and it's 4 years plus of your life, then you guys are all aligned, and it's going to work fine.
So who has ever had a question about something like this, or some legal issue or tax issue or something, and you wished you could talk to somebody who knew this kind of stuff? You can pick the phone up and call them. Yeah, right, okay. Everyone that didn't raise their hand is a liar, because us entrepreneurs don't know a damn thing about it. If someone wanted to get in touch with you or contact your firm, how could they do that?
The easiest one, I would encourage you to do as much self-help as you can. Not trying to turn down business, of course, but the fact is there are some really good resources out there for these kinds of questions. And like any informed consumer of information, you can use internet resources to learn a lot about this stuff. But the firm is Fenwick & West. The website is www.fenwick.com, Fenwick, and you can actually we have a number of relatively useful 13-point memos of this is what you want to do if you're building a company for venture capital financing, and this is how it works, and so on. And you're welcome to check those out. And you don't even need to come in for a free consultation to do that.
What do you look for? What's a great client for you?
For me, to really want to take a company on, one, I don't need to be practicing law. I've done enough things that I'm doing it because I really enjoy doing it. I like working with interesting people doing interesting things. So that's before we even get to the what the company needs to look like. I get real interested if it's cutting edge content or internet ad networks or what we do. I do most work with internet companies. So past that, there's is it a company that is going to become a large company? Is it going to raise financing or do through organic growth? Is there a future of 2 to 7 years out where this is a 20 to 50 or 100 or whatever $1 million business? Because ultimately, if you're not swinging for the fence, if you're not trying to build something like that, you don't need the talents of lawyers at the the level that we practice. There are a lot cheaper people out there that do both legal advice as well as quasi-legal advice. But it's, if you're trying to aim the howitzer several miles out and hit a target that is very, very valuable, you want to make sure that it's aimed correctly. And I like to be one of the people who's figuring out how to aim it. And you got to aim it exactly right to hit the target. And if you're a little bit off on how you put the company together initially, or how you build your founder stock, or how you bring the money in, or whatever, you can go way wide of the target. And that's really interesting. Is the the design of something that's built to, if necessary, if you're successful, it could be the next $1 billion public offering.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Mark. That was very informative.
Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you for being here.